I have two amazing men who are going to be joining me on this panel. Let's bring them out on stage. Darren Walker, the president and CEO of the Ford Foundation, and Mike Petrilli, president and CEO of the Thomas J. Fordham Institute. Let's give them a round of applause. I almost got you guys in trouble. I was trying to get you to come out on stage with me. Okay. I apologize. So we're going to be talking this morning about the American dream. And before we do, I feel like it would make sense to define what it is that we're talking about. So Darren, why don't you start? When you hear that term, which goes back to 1931, what does it mean to you?
What it means to me is an equality of opportunity, that the American dream is about a level playing field. It's about a nation without hierarchy, and that affirms the humanity of every individual and allows for the dreams and aspirations of those young people to be realized.
Mike?
First of all, I just want to say it is a great honor to be here with you today. All of us, after we recommit to kids, I think after that breakfast, we're going to need to recommit to our diets as well. But if you ever see bacon on a stick, I think the rule is you have to eat it. Is that right? I'm going to cheat a little bit. I want to quote from the new bard of Broadway, as we are just steps away from there, Lin-Manuel Miranda. In my house, maybe in yours as well, I've got two young boys, and the Hamilton musical soundtrack is on nonstop. And I think there's a reason that this musical has struck such a chord in America, and it's that it is about the American dream. Let me quote from the first song, and don't worry, I'm not going to try to sing or much less rap it, okay?
That's deeply disappointing.
Yes, it says, "How does a bastard, orphan, son of a whore and a Scotsman, dropped in the middle of a forgotten spot in the Caribbean by Providence, impoverished in squalor, grow up to be a hero and a scholar? The $10 founding father without a father got a lot farther by working a lot harder, by being a lot smarter, by being a self-starter." And that's it. You know, it's this dream that in America, unlike anywhere else in the world, we had this belief that no matter what your station in life, which circumstances you were born into, you could be anything, you could go anywhere, you could get to the top, just like Alexander Hamilton did. And I think that that is the dream, and I think that dream is still alive, though it's also at risk today.
It's at risk in part because there is a difference in the narrative of who we see ourselves as a people, and the reality of the lived experience of many of us. And so one of the reasons Hamilton was so compelling was because the cast were all people of color. Mm-hmm. And what compelled us by Lin's brilliant creativity was that he cast this with black and brown men and women in mind, because he felt that it was important at this time in America to assert affirmatively the creativity of this community, and how often, even on Broadway, the larger challenges of racism and exclusion that have plagued our country since its founding remain relevant today and are a critical barrier to the American dream being realized. And so in order for the American dream to be realized, we have to come to grips with things that make us uncomfortable, like race and class, and get uncomfortable, particularly those of us who are privileged. Because in order to make progress in America, we privileged people are going to have to get, as Congressman John Lewis says, a little uncomfortable.
So how do you get uncomfortable? As I make myself comfortable.
Well, I think we get uncomfortable by facing up to the truth. And the truth is that our country is an amazing place. And when you see the narrative arc of the great General Colin Powell, it is inspiring to believe in our dream that this black man from humble beginnings comes to a point where he is the most important leader of the military, of the most important military in the world. And so that gives us inspiration. But he had to overcome huge odds, and race was one of those challenges that he had to overcome. And so what makes us uncomfortable is that those of us who believe that the dream and the abstract happens because you work hard, you play by the rules. There are a lot of people in this country who work hard and who play by the rules, and their dream is squashed because of their gender, because of their race, because of their sexual orientation. So we need to get uncomfortable in facing up to that reality.
And somehow we have to hold these two ideas at the same time, which is that we still do have these great inequities that Darren talked about. While at the same time, the message that we send to young people has still got to be, I think, the message that you can make it. Even in the face of all of these great challenges, it is still possible. Because otherwise, the message we send to young people would be one of despair, one of powerlessness. And so, as adults, as the adults here, we have to work on fixing those problems while also continuing to tell young people,
all right,
you
tell
can
me what
achieve.
you mean, though. When you say work, I mean, when you talk about Hamilton, for example, part of the way that he was able to write his way out was through education, and
Right.
much of that was self-taught. But this is where the reality of the individual works against institutions or with institutions in American society. How do you then suggest that we recreate that dream, change the reality?
That's right. Look, and there, as we've already heard from the Powells, we have made a lot of progress in the last 20 years. There are more opportunities today for young people, I would argue, than we had back then. The world that I live in is in education reform. And while we have a long way to go, we've made significant progress, particularly for our lowest performing students, for our lowest income students, for students of color. They are performing 2 to 3 grade levels ahead of where their counterparts were back in the 1990s. That is remarkable progress, and it is now showing up in much higher graduation rates and opportunities for young people. So there is progress. In this city and cities all across the country, we have institutions that are helping young people make it from low-income neighborhoods all the way into the middle class. Some of those are charter schools, some of them are traditional public schools, some of them are using the pathway to college, others are using this pathway to high-quality career and technical education. We have educators around the country that are solving these problems, and so we can see that it is happening. We just have a long way to go.
And I agree. I think we should be really gratified by the progress, but we can't make a statement like education is the great equalizer in America and then make education more unattainable, right? So we can't, it becomes, so when we say to young people, you can do it if you work hard and play by the rules, college will be available to you. Well, how do we, that sounds disingenuous. When you look across the country and you see, for example, state legislatures reducing their subsidies to make it affordable for more students, particularly low-income students. So it sounds like platitudes and insincerity when adults say things like that, because the contradiction lays bare what our real priorities are.
So if you could wave a magic wand and have one thing fixed as a barrier to the dream, what would it be?
I think the greatest barrier is what happens when a child is young. We now know from the data the impact that early childhood learning has and the brain development that occurs between 0 to 6. So we should be making deeper, more profound investments in that area. But we also, on the other end, have to look at higher education and think about how we make college or vocational school more attainable.
Right. And, I think one of the things that gets lost when we talk about higher education, the cost of higher education, the debt associated with higher education, is how that impacts all elements of our economy. So I'm a millennial born to baby boomer parents. Their notion of the dream was crystal clear, right? They wanted secure employment, retirement. They wanted to be able to own their first home. for my generation, when you talk to so many of us, that student debt is what's keeping us from making some of what we consider those adult decisions, like buying a home, like starting a family, like getting married. So we're up against these barriers as young people out in the world who are trying to make larger financial decisions, which in reality affect all of us, right? If I can't buy your home from you, you can't sell it. And so we're all very much in this ecosystem where these institutions are impacting not just this future generation, but generations at large.
That's right. You know, one other issue that I think we have to talk about today, and talk about it in a way that is inclusive and brings us together, is the importance of families. You know, this is not an issue that should resonate just on one side of the political spectrum. We all know that if a child is born into a family where the parents are ready to take on that huge role of parenting, they are ready because they're just old enough, because they've already finished their education, they've already gotten a foothold in the economy. Ideally, two parents, right? Regardless of gender, two parents that can split this enormous task of raising a child in 21st century America, that we are better off. We still have a situation today where children, the first thing that happens to them is whether or not they win this parent lottery, whether or not they are lucky enough to be born to parents who are themselves ready for this huge role. And so, again, the message we send to young people is important.
Can I interrupt you there? I'm curious, again, going back to this idea of institutions, then what institutional support do we need to have strong families?
No, I'm glad you asked that. I mean, so we shy away from this in rooms like this because we don't know how to fix this issue. We have a situation where almost every low-income child in America today is living in a single-parent family. And many of those single parents, most of them moms, are doing heroic jobs, right? How do we change that? Well, part of it is that we need our civil institutions of civil society. We need those churches. We need those community organizations that are part of this network to stand up and to help support families. We also need schools to be willing to say to young people, hey, you have a shot. When you're a teenager, think about this. If you make good choices, if you get your education, if you wait to start a family until you're ready, your children can win the parent lottery. We need to send those messages to young people as well.
Darren, do you buy that?
I buy it, but it's insufficient, because the reality is the greatest system that is harming low-income families in America today is our criminal justice system. We have to recognize that we have a criminal justice system that is racist, that is biased, and it was constructed with those aims in mind. And we, again, in rooms like this, we have to be willing to confront both realities, because I agree with Mike that we absolutely need to parent households. But when fathers can't find jobs in an economy that increasingly marginalizes them, and with one potential dust-up that gets you ensnarled into a criminal justice system, because we have a cash bail system that makes money off the poor, of course we're going to be doing harm to families. And we know that the evidence, the data is incontrovertible. What the criminal justice system has done to black and brown families and their communities is profoundly harmful to the American dream.
Mike, I think sort of the reason everybody's here is because they want to know what they can do. So what's the doing?
Undo the system. I mean, what the doing is to undo the system. And so it is not, there are places where the system is being undone and we are seeing the positive results. Those states that have ended cash bail are already seeing the positive effects of that. So there are ways, there are solutions here. I mean, the thing that we should be excited about is that these problems are solvable.
That's right.
They are solvable. It is within our reach. The question is, do we as America have the will to execute on the solutions?
That's right. And the good news is
have the last word.
We're seeing progress on this particular issue, super important at the state level. We could also see progress at the federal level. You know, so many of us here are so disillusioned by what we see in Washington today. But we cannot have an attitude that there is going to be zero progress over the next 3.5 years. I mean, this is an issue, criminal justice reform, where there's bipartisan support. Let's keep the pressure on our lawmakers and on our leaders to get good things done for children, even when that means reaching across the aisle.
All right, please join me in thanking Darren and Mike.